everybody, it's Claire here from Sewn by Claire, and today I'm ready to start and dress Sapphire the Fox. So we're going to make the outfit in the book, which is this one, which is called Sew Felt Animals by Claire Bowman of Lily Rose Dolls. And the character is not on the front cover, the one that I want to make, but ever since I saw her outfit, I just knew that I wanted to make her clothes. I'm just trying to find the page for you. So this is Chester and Sapphire Fox, excuse that bit, it's just to keep in my place, in their lovely autumnal outfits there from the book designed by Claire Bowman of Lily Rose Dolls. And it's this outfit that I want to make here to dress my Sapphire Fox into, because I just love that. So what we're going to do is, I've got the book here, I've got my fabrics, I've picked up this lovely linen viscose from Sew Wardrobe in Ashby de la Zouche. I've got a little bit of lace, and I've also picked up the fabric for my jacket as well, which hasn't been ironed yet, which is why it's looking a bit creased. But we're going to do that on a separate video. So the outfit for Sapphire consists of these Bella bloomers, the apron dress, the petal jacket, and the berry brim hat. So we're going to take it all in stages. We're going to do one thing at a time, and today it's the turn of the Bella bloomers, because if we were going to get this character dressed, the bloomers are the first thing that we put on, so that's where I'm going to start. So brain's going off in different directions, sorry. I have already made bloomers twice, once for Clara the cat and once for Lillian the lamb as well, but we're going to do this step by step as they're called in the book, so that if you're following along from the book, then it will make sense to you and the names will make sense. So this is the Bella bloomers. This little piece here is the pattern I've got sticking out of the top, which is saving the place for me. We've got another picture here on page 38 of the bloomers, and they're just really just long shorts, I suppose, really, with the lace at the bottom, and then we've got some ribbon on either side here. I've not got any of this crushed ribbon at the moment, but when we get to that stage I'll show you how to add it anyway, regardless of what ribbon you have got. And then later we'll go on to make the apron dress, the petal jacket, and the berry brim hat in time. So watch out for those as well. And if you're not a subscriber already and you want to sew along to make Sapphire's outfit with me, then if you click the subscription button, it doesn't cost you anything, it's completely free, but it will then mean that you can also click the notification bell, and then you'll get a message from YouTube whenever I've uploaded a new video. So that will just keep you up to date with everything, or you can just keep checking back if you can remember the name of the channel. Okay, I'll pop the camera down and we'll get started. Just before we get going, what I wanted to also point out is that these Bella bloomers apply to Emma the Highland cow, and also to Elisha, where's Elisha, she's here, the elephant as well, and they're all wearing the same Bella bloomers, so they're all made in the same way. So once you've made one, you can just rinse and repeat for your other characters. Also for Elisha as well, she's got these patches, this threadbare look on her clothes, and that's just squares of fabric which you can fray at the edges, and then before you sew on your elastic in your waist or on the bottom of your legs, I'll put a note in the video to remind you, you'll sew those patches on just in a square around the unfrayed section of the fabric, and that will attach those on for you. Okay, I just wanted to say that. Okay, in true Back to the Future style, here we have the actual bloomers that we make as part of this video. Well, they're just slightly twisted to one side there. But they're the actual bloomers that we are making in the video today. So hopefully you agree that you like those and how they've turned out, and you can continue to watch the video then in confidence, knowing that your bloomers will turn out exactly the same as these. Okay, so I've got my book, and I'm going to need to turn to page 102 and 103, well really page 103 really, because the bloomers is just this one piece of pattern piece that's nice and easy for you to start with. And what you must remember is that with the Lily Rose Dolls patterns, you need to add your seam allowance to your edges, because none's been added. There is a little note in the book here that does say to add it unless otherwise indicated. Now the only thing is, they haven't said don't add your seam allowance to your fold line here, which is this long straight line just here, look. So we've got a fold, and that these arrow symbols here mean that there's a fold on that line. So on this edge here, I haven't added any seam allowance, but on the other edges, this edge, this one, round the corner and across here, then I have done. And what I do with my patterns is I take some tracing paper, tissue paper, I lay it over the top of the pattern on my book, and then I will then print that, draw around that and add the seam allowance either into the book or onto my pattern piece afterwards. It doesn't make any difference. Once I've got my pattern piece, that's fine. This one's not too complicated, so it's all okay. So once you've done that, you can cut out your pattern piece on your, including your 1/4 inch seam allowance or 6mm seam allowance, and then we're all ready to go. So let's just pop this to one side. This is the fabric that I've chosen for my character, and if you look at the outfit in the book, where are we here? Then we've got this lovely dress with a bodice underneath, sleeveless bodice dress, and the skirt, and then the lovely bloomers just poke out at the bottom with that little lace trim at the bottom there. So we're going to I'm making my bloomers in the same fabric as my dress, but you can use a different fabric if you want to. You don't have to copy it exactly as it is in the book. I've just tried to do that so that it looks familiar for you when you're watching the videos or looking for the patterns on the channel. I've also chosen some of this little eyelash lace, which I think is really sweet. And to make sure that I've got enough for my pattern, then I halved it because I need one for each leg, or one piece for each leg. And then I lay it against my pattern and do 1, 2, and I've got a couple of inches spare, so that's perfect. So that'll do quite nicely, because with this pattern piece will be double, so I needed double the length of that pattern piece in order for it to be sufficient, and it is. So we are all good with that. We've got our fabric. Now, if you are using a quilting cotton, that would probably be better than the fabric I've chosen. The fabric I've chosen, if you look, has got a lovely drape to it. The only problem is that I wanted this dress to have a little bit of poof underneath it. So I will, when I come to make the dress, look at whether or not I interface my fabric to give it that poof. For the bloomers, I don't need to. I can just cut those out of this fabric because they're going to be lovely and comfy for Sapphire to wear, so don't worry about that. The only thing is, I bought this 70cm remnant from the Fabric Boutique in Ashby de la Zouch, and what I want to make sure is that I've got enough to do the dress as well. And so whenever I am cutting out something like the bloomers, then in order to make sure that I don't then cut into fabric that I need for the skirt, I'm going to cut out the skirt at this point in time as well. I know that might seem, or I suppose I could do a pattern piece, couldn't I, as well, which might just do it, or I could just measure it out. But what I'm trying to say is that I want you to be aware that if you've got a limited amount of fabric, such as I have, then we want to make sure that we can get everything we need out of this one piece of fabric before I cut any pieces out of it. So for the dress, I have already traced off my pattern pieces, and I've got a note here that I need 22cm by 115cm for that skirt. So using my pins and a tape measure, I am just going to have a look at this bottom edge to see if it's fairly straight or not. I can see already that it's not, but that's okay because we can accommodate for that, we can allow for that. So I'm just putting this together, and then I know that this fabric is probably not far off the width that we require. So I'm going to measure my 22cm up, and I'm going to put a pin in, just to give me some indication for now, just roughly. So that gives me some idea. Let me just do it on this fold line as well, so just so that I know that I've got sufficient fabric there. Okay, so I won't pin anything below this line here, which will be for my skirt. I have, if you look, I have already overlocked this fabric and I have pre-washed it. Now that's something that I do with all of my fabric that comes into my workshop, my sewing room. Workshop sounds very grand, doesn't it? Into my sewing room, in order that I know that this has already been washed and dried and it's all ready. So we're going to do something, a special fold here, so that we've got a double fold. So I'm going to fold in from the selvage edge this side, and then I'm going to fold in from the selvage edge this side, and that will give me 2 folded edges that I can use for my pattern. I'm going to measure from the selvage edge to my fold. That will make sure that I'm straight of grain. Remember, we like to be straight of grain when we're doing any of this cutting out. So you know that I'm very frugal with my fabrics. Let's have a look at the widest point on this piece. So from the fold line out, we need to be 15 centimetres. So we've got way more than that at this edge here. So let me just measure until this gets to about 15 centimetres, or a lot less, Claire. You can always just hold your pattern piece against it as well to give you some idea. So I'm just shuffling this fabric back until the 15 centimetre mark is on this fold line here. I might have gone too far now, let's have a little look. No, that's about right. So you don't want to have any of the selvage edge in with your pattern piece when you've cut it. So let's have a look. So that's 15.5, and let's have a look at the top. So that's less. So let me just move this one out slightly on the top. Just seeing how. So that's gone a little bit too far. 15.5. 15.5, right, that's fine. So let's pop our pattern piece on here. I'm just making sure as well that I'm well away from my bottom of my fabric, and I am, to make sure I'm not cutting into anything that I don't want to lose. And I've buttered this pattern piece right up to that fold edge, look. I'm going to put 1 pin in, make sure that you've equal at the top and bottom, and that that your pattern piece starts and finishes on that fold line on the edge. Once you've done that, you can then just pin your pattern piece onto your fabric with as many pins as you feel comfortable. Just try and keep your pins in your seam allowance if you can do, so that you're not going to snag any fabrics at all on there. And then once we've done this one, we're going to then cut out on the outer line, which includes our seam allowance. Once I've done that, I'm going to repeat that process, but over the other side of my fabric here, where I've got my second fold, because what we want to do is we want to have those 2 folded edges on our pattern piece here. The front and the back of this pattern is exactly the same, so it doesn't matter about anything else. You don't need to worry about the curve being different front and back because it's the same. So we can just cut those out. So let me go and do those, and then I'll come back to you. And if you do the same, just make sure you've measured from your folded edge to your sides, and then you'll be able to know that you've got the fibres in your fabric are running directly up north to south, and that will be great. Okay, back in a minute. Just on a quick note to say that if you were feeling that you were short of your fabric at all, I can see from mine that I'm going to have plenty with this section here for the skirt, and then there's plenty for the bodice. But if you were feeling shorter than the fabric that I've got, just remember to lay all of your pattern pieces out for your dress and your bloomers at the same time. And what I might actually do is use the contrast of this fabric to do the contrast on the hat and the jacket collar, rather than using a different colour, because I've got this fabric in especially to use. So I will be able to get those smaller pieces out, but make sure that you've at least got your big largest pieces mapped out on your fabric, even if it means you laying out all of the fabric for your jacket, not your jacket's not in this fabric, your jacket accents, your hat accents, your dress and your bloomers before you start cutting anything else, because I don't want you to cut anything that you later find that you needed. So I'm just about to do my second side. I've just measured my measurements and they're the same, but I've noticed at the top here I've got a slight undercut on that top edge there, where that's slightly lower than the other side. So just be careful when you're laying your pattern piece out that you feel underneath and that you're low enough on this front piece in order to accommodate for that. The other thing is that whereas the first one was cut with the writing up, I'm now going to turn my pattern piece upside down so that my folded edge is on the right side, and that's perfectly acceptable to do that. You can also, if you wanted to, turn your pattern piece upside down when it's a single type of fabric like this and like your quilting cotton. If there's no pattern on it, if there's a pattern on it, just make sure your pattern isn't directional, i.e. that when you look at it one way, it's perfect, but when you look at it turned upside down, it's the wrong way round. Because obviously that's going to affect, this is the waist of your bloomers, and that's the hem. And if you put it against the other one, the pattern's going to be off. So just be aware of that. I tend to just flip my pattern over. I'll feel at the top to make sure that I've got enough room for my pattern pieces. It needs to come down just slightly more because I can feel where that overlocked edge is. And then I'm just going to pin my pattern piece onto my fabric again, first starting on this folded edge to make sure that both edges are on the fold, and then I can put the rest of the pins in order just to secure that into place, or you can use pattern weights if you're using pattern weights. Okay, let me cut this piece out then, and then I will meet you back here and we'll be talking about our thread and getting started. So the first thing I've done when I open up my pattern pieces is I want to note which is the right side, especially on this fabric that looks very similar, but it can actually have a difference in the way that it's been woven. And so I don't want it to look dissimilar. So when I've taken my pattern piece off, I then noted that the right side of my fabric was on the inside. So I've opened it up and I've just taken a pin and very carefully just done a double pin like that through the fabric. That just tells me that that's the top fabric, and I've done that on the other one as well. So both of them have been marked now that they're the top of the fabrics. This is best when you're working with something like the bottom edges first, which we're going to be doing to neaten those, because it would be very easy to have one way and one the other. And I can see close up there is a slight difference in the way that these have been woven, and so it would look different. So that way we just make sure that we always keep our right sides up. We'll move the pin later. Just be careful if you're working with a fine fabric like a silk or a satin that your pin doesn't mark your pull a thread on your fabric in the middle. You might want to just do something a little bit close to the edges where you can you're not going to see it so off closely there. Okay, so once we've got that set up, let's get ready to have your lace ready as well, because we're going to need that. Let me just double check that lace again. Yep, all good, nothing's changed. And then we're going to get our machine set up now with our coordinating thread to do a zigzag stitch on our trousers first, our bloomers. So let's do that section first. Let's have the coordinating colour in our machine. Okay, so let's set my machine up now for a zigzag stitch, and I've just left it at my general settings, which is a 5 width and a 2 length, and that was just the standard stitching. And then I'm going to just put my fabric in. So we want to zig into the fabric, but then when we zig, we want to zig just off the edge of the fabric so that it catches any loose threads that might be there. So just line your stitches up to do that as well. And then we're going to start off with, it'll do a few stitches in place first, and then it'll start in zigzag. You'll notice that I didn't reverse at the end of that row of stitching, but that's because the ends are going to be kept sewn into the seam that does this section, so I'm not worried about that. So first of all, I'm going to take off my starting and my stopping threads, which we always do. And then can you see these little whiskers that we have over the edge of the fabric there? Just very carefully, just go and just snip those off without snipping through any of the stitches. It'll just tidy it up and make it look really nice and neat. Just take your time doing that. And what we're going to do, I mean, of course, if you've got an overlocker, you can overlock this as well. I'm just using my zigzag function on my machine because I think most people will have that. Not everybody's got an overlocker. Okay, so that's got those to one side. And there we've got our zigzagged edge now ready for our lace. So what I want you to do now is just go on, while you've got the same colour thread in your machine, just go back now and just do the same to the bottom of your other leg, keeping the right side up of your fabric, and that will neaten that edge off as well. And then we'll come back to change our thread and we'll add our lace onto the bottom. Okay, so now I've just changed my thread colour over to one that's going to match my lace. I'm going to check for the right side up for my lace, which is that way. let me go this way because we want to be able to put this on the bottom. So I'm taking one of my legs and I'm now going to put the top side of my lace. I just leave a little overlap over the edge just to make that easier. Find some pins, got lost. And I'm just going to put a pin, so I try and put the lace so that it just overhangs the bottom of the bloomer leg, but I want to cover all of those zigzag stitches. So what I'm trying to say is, rather than putting the lace on so that the bottom of the lace is in line with the bottom of the fabric, can you see how that might look? Then what I'm doing is, see this band on the bottom of the lace, I'm running that along the bottom of the fabric so that you can see that the lace overhangs the bottom of the fabric, and that way I think you get a prettier effect. Obviously the choice is yours and it will depend on the lace that you've got as to what you want to do, and also whether you need to pin or not. I probably wouldn't pin necessarily, but I'd take my time sewing this to make sure that everything was lined up properly. And then just so that that lace is just over the edge like that. Then we can go to our machine and I'm going to put onto a small zigzag now. So whereas I was on a width of 5 before, I'm going to take that down to a 2, and then I'm going to take my stitch width along, stitch length along to a 1.5. So my settings for putting the lace on with, because I want my zig to go into the one side of the lace and my zag to come across to the other, but I don't want to catch any of the, as little of the fabric as I can do underneath it, and that should start. And I am going to reverse on the end here. So let's just do a couple of stitches first to see if that's okay. And it is. Let me just reverse. Yeah, just holds it steady. I'm just going to line my fabric up with the edge of the zigzag stitches, and then we can start sewing. Just do a bit at a time, and the needle in the work, and then we can stop, take our hands off, and we can just refix all of that. If you need to lift your presser foot up just to reline everything up together, then do so. And we'll do a little bit more. As soon as it feels like it's starting to go off kilter though, just stop again and then just readjust and keep your needle in the work, and that will help you then hold everything steady. If you've not got a button, I've got a button where my needle will stay in my work, and when I press that it moves my button up, or whenever I stop sewing it puts the needle into my fabric for me. Or you can use, if I can find it for you, the hand crank on the side here, and that lifts and lowers your presser foot for you. So every time you stop, just pull that needle, just roll that wheel towards you so that your needle is always in your work, and that way then you'll always have a hold of it. Let's just carry on a bit further. I can see mine starting to go off, so let me just lift up that fabric, pull that down again. Then we'll just carry on all the way along. And then we're going to repeat for the other leg as well. Try and minimise the number of times we have to change our thread colour by doing similar steps together. Just going to reverse at the end, and then without taking my lace out of the work, I've got my needle in my work, I'm going to lift up my presser foot, I'm going to get my second leg, and I'm going to just pop that so that it lines up to the other one, and it's just going to carry straight across. And what that means is you save thread, but only minimal amounts, but it means that you don't have to do a cut in between your thread, in between your lace, and then lose some of your lace. So press the foot back down again when you're ready. I'm just going to go on to the second one, and then just reverse at the start there like before, and then I'm going to put my needle in my work whenever I stop, and then I'm just going to work along this edge on the second leg. I've just finished the second one, take my needle out of the work, and now I'm going to snip off my lace and my finishing threads. I'm going to go to the middle of my bloomers and I'm going to cut off the lace in between. And then we just have that little bit. I'm just going to leave that intact on the end there because that will help. It got to the end of a design. If you look, I've got these scallops on the edge of mine. So rather than cut that little bit off and open up those stitches, I've left that little one intact, even though it's over the edge of my fabric slightly. But don't worry about that. Now that we've got our lace on the bottom of our bloomers, we can now take out our pins, showing us the right side of our fabric because we've used that already. And what we're going to do now is we're going to attach our elastic. Just put a little bit of lace to one side. Our elastic along here. And what we need to do is we need to mark a line. Let's go on to the inside. So let's put the lace side down. Let's get our chalk or our chalk pencil. Let's hope the white will work. And then we're going to measure 2 centimetres up from the top of the fabric, the top of the lace. Yeah. So I've got a little mark that I can see. Hopefully you can see as well. And I'm doing this on the inside of the bloomers, not on the outside. And I'm just measuring up 2 centimetres from the top of that lace. I can see the colour of the thread. Oh gosh, my words won't come right today, will they? The thread on the back of my fabric because it's a different colour to my original colour. Can you see how that's got the little line so I know where I'm looking? And then I'm marking with my chalk pencil. You might not be able to see those marks. You're going to have to trust me that they are there. So I'm going to mark this. What I'm doing to this one leg, I'm going to copy exactly across onto the other leg again in a minute, but we're going to just do one at a time for now, just so that you can see me, because you can always rewind the video and I can record, carry on off camera, and then at least it's going to mean you're not having to watch me do everything too many times. So let's just make those chalk marks nice and dark. Okay, so hopefully you can see that I've got chalk marks along there. Yeah, you can see those. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to get a length of elastic. But first of all, we need to get Sapphire. So let me just get Sapphire. So here she is, because I want to measure around her ankle. So let's get the end of the elastic, which is here for me. And then I want to put the stretchy elastic. I want to put the elastic around her leg. Let's take that knot out the end, don't need that. So that it's comfortably sitting around her ankle with a little bit loose. I don't want it to be too tight on her. So it's going to be about that. But what I also want to do is pinching onto the ends, because we're going to lose some in the seam allowance. I also want to make sure that that will go on and off over her foot nice and easily. And it will, so that's fine. So let me just give it a little bit extra, just so we've got it. And then we'll cut that off. And then I want to measure off an equal one as well. I'll just measure it in a second and tell you how long it is. Just make sure you're not stretching your elastic when you cut it off, so that you've not made it longer. And let's have a look. Just a minute, Sapphire, let's put you back over there again. She's getting excited seeing her new bloomers. Right, so let's just measure this piece of elastic. So mine is 6 inches long, which is, so let's look on centimetres. For those of you who work, 15 centimetres that is. So I've got my 2 pieces now, and what I'm going to do is, just using one piece at a time, because we're just doing one leg at a time, aren't we? I'm going to put one piece of elastic on the inside. I'm going to pin one piece of elastic to that, just underneath that 2-inch mark, so closest edge to the closest edge to the lace. So I'm going below that. Let's just fold this in half so we get a halfway point as well, because that will be useful for when we're attaching our elastic. So there's a halfway point on my elastic, and then the other end is going to come all the way up to here. Let's put a pin here. So that's going to hold my elastic at those anchor points. Let me just fold my leg in half to give me a halfway point as well. So that's there. And then on that, roughly on that halfway point, let's put that elastic in there without it twisting. So then what you'll see is, you'll see that this is quite bunched up. But when we stretch it out, look, the elastic will go the same length as the leg. So I'll show you how to start this off, because it can look a bit tight and a bit intimidating. Just rewind that back if you need to be able to see how I've attached how I've attached the elastic. That's the words I wanted. So we're going to be sewing now onto our bloomer legs. Let's just change our thread back to our yellow again, because we're going to see that. I don't mind seeing the yellow on the white elastic, because that will be on the inside of the garment, but I don't want you to be able to see white thread on the outside of my bloomers. So therefore I'm just changing my thread over, and it can make all the difference if you just change your thread and get the right colour with what you're sewing with. Okay, so now I'm still on a zigzag stitch, but I'm going to take my stitch width up to a 3. I am doing this slightly differently to the way that Claire does it in the book. In the book, Claire will have you do a line of zigzag and then thread your elastic through. But I've found that this way works slightly better for me. So this is, I'm hoping it will do for you as well. So now that my machine's got the right colour in and I've got my elastic all ready, I'm keeping it on a zigzag stitch, but I've changed my stitch width, the way it zigs and zags, to a 3. And I've changed my stitch length to a 2 now. So I'm going to line this up with my presser foot. So that's going to stitch in there. And I haven't got my elastic stretched at the moment. All I've done is just laying the elastic on top of the fabric at the seam edge. And I'm just going to do a few stitches just in place and then rewind it as well. Just for a couple of stitches, just to anchor that down. Needling the work. I've also got some threads at the back of my work, and you might not have that, so if you haven't, you'll need to make sure that you switch off your function to give you that. And that's what I'm doing now, is I'm stretching my thread, my elastic, so that the edge of the elastic runs on the lines, and then I pinch it with my finger. I'm going to hold on to the threads at the back, and I'm going to sew, following this fabric through, without it gathering up. Then I'm going to stop. My needle is in the work. If you look at the back there, it's gathering up. Now I'm going to pull on the fabric again. I'm going to go to the halfway point. I'm still making sure that I'm on my white line. Keep my finger on, but this time I can hold on to the fabric at the back. And I'm going to pull the fabric straight so that the elastic just sits flat against it. Don't stow over your pins. When I get to the pin, I'm going to take that out. And we move along the elastic, with the elastic along against those white marks, that 2 centimetre mark, all the way. You can't really pin this very well, but if you put your finger on it quite hard, it'll hold everything in place, and then you can pull your fabric through. A bit fast. Stop again when you get to your finger. Don't sew over your finger. And then when you get to the bottom, just sew quite close up if you can do. You've got to just hold on to that lace at the end to get quite close, and then you can take your pin out and you can just sew off the edge and reverse if you've got tats. That didn't like that, did it, at all? Okay, so what I've got now is I've got my elastic sewn onto the edge of my bloomers like that, and it's gathered it up to give it that gathered finish. Let's take off our starting threads. And there we can see that when we've got our legs together, the sides of the seams of our legs together, we're going to have a nice bloomer there. We can also steam this elastic as well once we've finished, which we'll do just to tighten it up again, but that will just get that elastic on, so that's all nice and secure for you. So what I want you to do before we do anything else is go on and do the same on the other leg. Mark your 2 centimetres up on the inside of your fabric, measure your elastic, find your halfway point. Just put a pin in just so that you've found that, and then you're going to pin your elastic onto your leg at the start, at the stop and at the middle, and that will help you then stitch that through. Okay, let me do mine and then I'll come back to you. Okay, so I've got 2 of my legs now done, and what I'm going to do is turn one over so I've got the right side up, and then I'm going to turn one over so I've got the right side down, and I'm going to match these ways. So can you see the laces together, and I can see that my elastic is up on the top one and it's down on the bottom one. What we're going to do now is take some pins. We're going to match up these waist edges here and put a pin in, and we're just going to take that all the way down on the crotch, this crotch curved seams. Let's match together the point in the crotch there where the end of the curve is. We're just going to pin those together. So that's one side, and then we'll repeat the other side in a second, but let's just sew this one first. So I'm going to start on this one from the crotch and sew up, because that's the way that I've pinned it. Let's take it off our zigzag stitch and put it back onto a straight stitch, and we're going to sew this with a 1/2 centimetre or 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Just going to reverse stitch at the start, needle in the work and take our pins out, and then we're going to just slowly go around this crotch curve, and if we need to we'll stop, leave our needle in the work, lift up the presser foot and turn our fabric in order that we can get a nice smooth line around this curve. Again here, pins out, don't sew over pins unless we miss one by accident, but we don't deliberately sew over pins. I'm going to reverse at the top here again. Needle out of the work, let's take our starting and stopping threads off. And now we're going to have a look at the other side, and we are going to pin this. If you've got an overlocker, then you can pin this as well if you wanted. So you can overlock this seam if you wanted to. Match up your the edge of your curved seam with the crotch point and match that up. And then we just match these edges together, raw edges together, so they lay nice and flat. They were cut from the same pattern piece, they should lie all nice and flat together. And let's go back to our machine and do the same thing on this leg as well. Okay, so once you've sewn those 2 seams, this is what it's going to look like. But what we've got to do now is we've got raw edges here, so we're going to go and neaten both of those edges now. So let's go back onto our zigzag stitch, and I'm going to take the stitch width down to a 3.5 and leave the stitch length at a 2, that's fine. And then we're just going to do the zigzag stitch just to neaten this edge as we have done before. Seam the threads off, and then we're going to trim those up in a second, but let's just turn this over. Let's do the other side while we're here. And then as before, we're going to just go back and just take off these whiskers, just fluff it up a little bit, and that will get rid of, show you any of the whiskers that are going to stand proud. Let's take those off. Just a few moments just to neaten it up, but it makes all the difference to when this is finished and how lovely it looks. Okay, those bits out of the way. So then the next thing that we're going to do now is we are going to neaten this top edge. So while we're still on our zigzag stitch, we are going to open up the waist. So you can see there's our 2 side seams. So we're doing this long flat top edge now. Let's start at 1 seam allowance. Just push it to the side, and then we're going to just stitch over the top of this seam allowance. I'm going to put my stitch length back up onto a 5 again, because I want it a nice deep zigzag. Needle in the work when we stop, just to keep our place. I'm just sewing so far, and then I'll stop, and then I'll roll the fabric towards me, so that it shows me the next section to then start to sew. And then I'll roll that towards me again so it shows me the next section. Because we're in a circle, we've got to go all the way around. So stop and again, roll towards me. And back to beginning, I'll just do a few stitches over where we started. Needle out of the work. And then let's take off our starting and our stopping threads. So again here, I'm just going to lift up those whiskers and just trim those off. Again, if you've got an overlocker, you could overlock this hem instead, this edge instead. And that would give you a look, you wouldn't need to do this then. Okay, so now we've got that all neatened. The next step then is we are going to make a channel for the waistband now, for the waist to sit in. And I think that Claire says turn over a 2 centimetre edge. Well, she said twice by 1 centimetre, but we could do a 2 centimetre edge. We've zigzagged, haven't we? So let's mark at 2 centimetres with our chalk pen again. And that'll tell us where we've got from the edge of the fabric down to that point there. Or if you wanted to, you can do it as Claire's done in the book, where she's done a turnover first and then another turnover, but that is giving you a very narrow section, and I think you've got a better chance of success if you just do 2 centimetres down from the edge of your fabric. If the length of the crotch area will be the same regardless of which method you use, so don't worry about that, the overall effect is the same. Oops, that's the lead in my chalk pencil. Okay, so let's now fold this over so that the edge is onto that 2 centimetre mark. Which way around? We're going to be sewing that way, aren't we? So let's pop our fabric this way around. So I'm just matching the edge of my zigzagged edge up against the 2 centimetre mark on that I marked with chalk. Seam allowance, just put it to one side or the other because we've zigzagged that together, so it'll just go one way or the other. And we're just going to then denote which is our front and our back, and they're both the same, so it doesn't matter which you use, but I'll show you my red pin trick for reminding us where we're going to start and stop. Or you can use whatever colour pins you like, but it's just a way of noting that there's something to remember at that section. Nearly there. Okay, so where we get to the back opening here, what I'm denoting as my back, I'm going to fold it over, but I'm going to use 2 red pins. So I'm going to start this side, and then I'm going to put 1 pin in this way round here, and I'm going to start another red pin this way round, and that means I just want to keep that section open when we start and stop. The rest of it is all with the pins all flat. You see how I've got those 2 pins like that with the red tops, and that's going to remind me to stop. So let's go back to our machine. Let's take it off our zigzag stitch down to a straight stitch, but I've moved my needle across to the left hand side. Let's take the free arm off as well, because it just shows you how to sew. If you've got the ability to, take the free arm off your machine like I have, so it leaves this open gap here, because then what we can do is we can feed our bloomers over the edge of our machine so that we can sew in a circle. So let's put our fabric down just neatly. We've remembered where we're starting because we've got the red pin, so let's just take that red pin out. And I've got my threads that I'm going to hold on to just while I start, and just do a few stitches forward, a few stitches back, just to reinforce that, needle in the work. And now I'm going to just sew along here at a nice even edge, about 2 centimetre. I'm going through my zigzag stitches in actual fact. And I'll show you why we need to keep to the left hand side of that hem. We can't just sew through the middle because we need to thread our elastic through this channel that we're making. So as you can see, each time I stop, I'm just stopping to take my pins out. Just remember, it takes a little bit more while you've got that seam allowance in the middle there, so just help it through if you need to. That's it. We're coming up to our other red pin, which reminds me that's where I need to stop, so I'm not going to close this gap up. So let's get close to that pin and then stop. I'll take the pin out and then I'm just going to reverse. I'll take our needle out of the work. We can take off our stopping threads and then we're going to show you what we do next. Take off our starting threads as well. Okay. So this is what we've got. We've got this channel with this little opening just here. And if you can see from my stitches there, I'm not right at the top of the channel and I'm not sewn through the middle. I've sewn to the bottom of the channel just through the zigzag stitches. Because now we want to get our elastic for the waist. Where's Sapphire? Come here, Sapphire, let's have a look at you. And then we're going to get some elastic here. And we're going to put that around her waist so that it fits her snugly without pulling it, but that we've got enough room to get those on and off. So it's probably around about there, because you need a little bit to cross over so that it's comfortable, but you don't want them falling down her. So just stand your character up and just have a look around her waist to make sure that's all fine. Once you've got your mark, you can just snip that off. Let me measure mine for you so that you can know how long this is. So my piece of elastic is 24, just over, about 24.5 centimetres long, which is about 9.5 inches. And what we're going to do now is we are going to find a safety pin. These little gold safety pins, little takeaway tubs that I like to use to keep my supplies in. Let's find a little safety pin. That one will probably do. Oops, can't pick it up, there we go. Right, and you want a safety pin that's going to fit through the channel without getting stuck, because it's really frustrating to get 3/4 of the way round and then your pin gets stuck. So I've just got a little safety pin. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take our elastic and we put our pin through the end of our elastic, about 0.5 centimetre to 1 centimetre in, because you don't want to be right on the very edge. Then what we're going to do then is we're going to just take our safety pin and we're going to feed it through the channel. And what you do is you enter the safety pin with the head side first into your channel, and then as you push on the pin, what you need to do is you need to grip the fabric between your finger and your thumb. So just lightly, so that when you push on the pin slides through your finger and your thumb. Hopefully you can see that. And then pinch with your finger and thumb and let go this side, and then give a little pull. And your pin will have moved a little way down your fabric, and you can just slide some on. You can see how it's all bunching up, and then with your left hand hold on to it, the pin, right hand let go, and just pull that fabric on. And that's how you just keep going along to then start to thread this on. Once you start it going, just let go of your pin, you're not going to lose that, but just take the edge of your elastic and just use a pin or a safety pin and pin the edge of the elastic to somewhere on your garment, because the number of times that you'll start threading your elastic through and then realise when you get to the end that the end of your elastic has followed you, and you don't want that to happen. So let's keep on pushing this through a little bit at a time, and you'll see that the elastic is disappearing through and into the trousers. Just like this. When you come to your seam allowance, you have to wiggle to get it through, because remember that seam allowance has been sewn in half. So sometimes it can be a little tricky just trying to get it through. If you get stuck, just undo your stitches just there, help it through the seam allowance, because you can always come back in again and close that up again. Let's Let's just keep on threading this through. Depends how expert you are at doing this as to how long it can take you, but you'll get there in the end. And keep your elastic straight without it twisting as well in your waistband. If it does, it's not too bad on this. On your own clothing, you wouldn't want to twist in your waistband because it would be uncomfortable to wear. But for a doll character, it doesn't matter quite so much. And now where our little gap was, and you should see your pin come out through your gap. There it is, there's my little pin coming out through my gap. So I'm just going to pull it through. So pull all the gathers onto your elastic. Let's go to where we secured the end. Take the pin out, but hold on to your elastic so it doesn't get pulled in. And then we're going to overlay these two pieces of elastic together. And the pin that we've used for putting it through, just put through both pieces of elastic. I do find that this next step is easier to do by hand than it is doing on the machine. So once you've got those two bits of elastic, just pull on them so that you've got them together. Let's get a needle and thread. I've got a needle ready threaded here, that will do. Let's put a knot in the end. Right. So with our threads, with the edges of our elastic overlapped still, we've got our pin in there, making sure they're lying flat and making sure that they're straight. I can see that those are straight all the way through. Just feel it and you'll feel your elastic. And if it's be a bit bumpy where there's a twist in it. And then we're just going to take a few stitches to start this needle and thread over. Start it off. Once you've started it, you can then take your safety pin out of the way because it will get in the way of what you're doing. Okay, and then we're just going to sew where the overlap of the elastic is. We're just going to do some over stitches just to sew those together. And then it doesn't have to be neat because it's not going to be seen. So you just need to it's just holding those edges of elastic together. And I've got a knot in my thread. Not what I wanted, just bear with me. I'll go and get that out. Anyway, you know what you're doing now. Just put those elastic, that's it, it's come out now. Just do those over stitches, just getting those elastic edges together so they sit nice and flat together. And then do a couple of stitches in place and then snip off your thread once you get to the end. Let me just carry on with this for a second. Nearly there. It doesn't take long, as I say. I have tried doing these on the machine before, but they can be really fiddly just to keep lined up. And by the time you've finished faffing around, you might as well have just sewn it by hand. So that's what we've done today. So then when we just pull on the sides of the trousers, that elastic will go back inside. And then all we're going to do is pull the waistband over. We're going to put a little pin in to hold the elastic out the way. So I'm not going through the elastic with my pin, I'm just going through the casing. And then if we go back onto our stitching here, we're going to again feed out, see how much tighter that waistband is, feed that over your machine, and you just need the part that you're going to stitch flat under your machine needle. And then just feel to make sure your elastic is up towards the edge, and it should be, and then a couple of stitches to start off and a couple of stitches to reverse, and then if you're careful you'll be able to sew this shirt without catching the elastic. Just getting caught on my seam allowance, and just reverse at the end. Let's take those threads off. And there we've got a lovely closed up waistband. So just stretch that elastic so that it's just nice and even around. You can just try them on if you want to, just to make sure there's no adjustments ready. I probably should have done that before we did the actual rest of it, but they're just sitting on there just nicely, look. So not too tight, but they're not slipping down either. We're nearly finished, Sapphire, don't worry. Let's put our arm back on our machine. Move our safety pins, because the next thing that we're going to do then is we are going to take our crotch point, which is the between the legs point, and we're going to put those together with the seam allowance going one way and one seam allowance going one way and one seam allowance going the other way. We're going to pop a pin in just to hold those together. Then we're going to come down to the hem edge. These are trousers, these bloomers are inside out. We're going to match up our bottom of our lace as well for our bloomers. And put a pin in just to hold that together for our starting point. If your pins won't go in, just give them a twist and they should. Match the elastic on top of each other as well and put a pin in there. And then along this side seam, we probably just need one, not side seam, it's the inside leg seam, isn't it? We just need one pin in there as well, just to hold that together. So let's go to the other side of the legs now. So we've got the crotch point already pinned. Let's perhaps pin our elastic first. That's probably easier, isn't it? Let's pin the two elastic bits on top of each other first. It's quite thick just there. And then let's put the two lace edges together, line that up as best as you can as well. And then we're going to pin that together too. And then we're going to put just one pin on this inside leg seam as well, just to hold that together for us. Okay, so here's our waistband and here's the inside leg seam that was sewn together with our lace hems. We've still got the yellow thread in our machine, and we are going to now start at one side of the leg and go to the others. The only thing I'm going to ask you to note is that if your lace is cream like mine is, I don't want to be sewing onto the lace cream with my yellow thread. So I'm going to start just where the yellow fabric starts and finishes and sew along there. I'll probably start here first, then reverse back, then come forward again, because so that this doesn't get caught in the machine. So let me show you. So I've got my threads out of the back, making sure nothing's getting folded in under where I don't want it to go. That's it. Let's put this, so I'm coming a little further forward into the yellow. I'm going to do a couple of stitches forward. I'm going to stop with my needle in the work, and then I'm going to reverse. Stop for my pin and take my pin out. But keep reversing back to the hem until I've finished sewing the hem bit that I wanted to sew, which is there. Then come forward again. Take your time over your elastic because that will try and stretch out of shape, but I'm going to do a double reverse over the elastic as well because that's a strong point that needs anchoring down. And then I'm going to sew then up the inside of the leg, stop for the pins, up towards the crotch point. Just make sure nothing's got folded underneath. We're on the crotch point now, so let's just move that direction and then just help the fabric through a little bit just on that crotch point, and then let's start sewing down the other side. Sure your raw edges are together, and they are. Down to the elastic. When we get to the elastic, let's take the pin out and then over the elastic but reverse back, and then down again, and then I'm coming down towards my lace, stopping at the edge of my yellow fabric and then reversing. All sounded a bit complicated, didn't it? But all I wanted to do was just reinforce where the pressure points are. So that's usually at the end of the legs, isn't it, on the edge seams of where the hem is, and then where the elastic is as well. The crotch point isn't too bad. So then what we want to do now is turn on to our zigzag stitch, and we're going to start on the zigzag stitch. You just take that down to a 3.5, I think, and a stitch width of 2. And let's just do a couple of stitches. Oh, my machine didn't like that, did it? Let me just take that out. It'll all have bunched up on the back. Threads haven't broken, so that's good. Okay, so in the end I just had to rethread my machine. Let's try again. Hold on to my stitches. Threads, I mean. That's better. And now I can reverse. just zigzagging this edge just to neaten it off. Over the crotch point and down the other leg. Then reverse. Okay, and let's take off our starting and stopping threads. As well as anything else, any little nests that you might have got, and then let's just neaten up these seams again, just taking off anything that needs to be trimmed back. Any little threads that have got caught. Point here, what I'll probably do as well is change my thread over to my cream thread, and then I'm just going to sew over that lace as well. So I'll start forward of the lace and then go backwards, and then that will just make sure that that lace isn't going to fray as well. You can also do that this bit by hand if you want to as well. Doesn't take long to change your threads over. Okay, so let's just go back to our lace here. I'm going to start in one section and I'm going to then reverse back over the lace, and that will hold that together for me. Take the threads off. Let's go on to the other one as well. Machines don't always like sewing over lace. It's just one of those things. Okay, so to all intents and purposes, we have now got a pair of finished bloomers. Let's just turn them around the right way round. And there we have our lovely, lovely bloomers. We're going to put those onto our character in a second. The only thing that I would say is that if you wanted to, is now's your time to add your ribbons and your embellishments. So let me help you do that. Let me just go and choose some, and I'll come back to you once I've chosen what I'm going to put on these. Okay, so I've just been to my trusty bag of thrifted ribbons, which is all the bits that I get off gifts, presents. If you get, sometimes if you buy some bedding, you get a ribbon that holds it all together. If you buy chocolates, you get ribbons that hold it all together, and I tend to save all of those. So I've just been through that and I have found some bits that will do. So I've got this piece of green which I quite like, quite a narrow ribbon, but it's quite nice and thin, and I would be able to get 2 bows, one for either side of her legs out of that. I've also got a piece of similar width but a piece of cream ribbon as well, so that could work. Yeah, I also found this grey which I quite like. That's a little bit longer, so I could probably get the 3 bows, one for each leg and one for her waist out of that. And that does look a little bit, it's a dark grey, but it does look as if it might complement the fabric that I've got for her jacket with that black in there. So that's an option. Didn't see if I had any black actually. I'll have a look and see if I've got any black. And then also got this one here which is like a chocolate brown with a silver on the other side. So again, that's an option that might look quite nice, and that does look nice against there and could put a nice little bow. I've got cream as well, or an off-white, that would probably do quite nicely with the colour of her lace as well on her legs. That could also work and make a nice little bow out of that as well. Decisions I'm thinking whilst I'm just talking to you. So little bows like that on the edge could look nice. I haven't got any of the crinkled, if you look on the picture on the front of the book, well, not on the front of the book, is it? It's going to be in here for Sapphire. Then she's got this crinkled ribbon on her legs, but I've not got any of that, so I can't use any of that. That's quite a nice thin ribbon, isn't it? Whereas this one feels quite stiff, this off-white. So let's disregard that as being too stiff. Put that back in there. I actually think this one might look quite nice with this chocolatey brown, because then it does pull in the brown of her jacket as well. So I think we'll do that. So let's have a look and see if we can get 3, split this into 3, one for her tummy, one for her, and one for each leg. be enough, shouldn't it? So let's just snip that there. And this piece into half. Put this fabric out the way. Right, let's just have a look. So let's just do a little loop and let's make the bow. I'm trying to get the chocolate brown on the outside. Just fold that through, not taking it short enough. The only trouble with when you're not working with a full reel of your ribbon, sometimes it can be a little tricky to get your lengths right. Just wanting to try and get 3 bows about the same kind of size. This one's quite a stiff ribbon as well, isn't it? I think it's just the colour that sort of appealed to me more than the other one. Just trying to get it twisted so that the chocolate brown is the dominant colour on it rather than the silver grey. You can work for me, thank you. You're going to decorate these lovely bloomers. There we go, that's better. A little bit of fiddling and eventually we get a nice bow. It will look nice. It's wanting to curl in a little bit, isn't it? There we go. So then we can use those on the side. So what I would do then is just trim that so that it's the same length as that one. It pretty much is. There's a little bow. Still got a little bit of the silver showing, but I think it'll be impossible to get rid of all of that. So then let's find that halfway point on the leg seam. And let's just get a bow and just pin it in place for the time being. I'll show you how to sew all these 3 bows on in a second. So I'm just pinning that over the top of the elastic. There we go. So that's that one. So let me just go off and make the other 3 bows. You don't need to watch me do that again, and I'll come back to you when I'm about to stitch these on, just to show you how I stitch those on. Okay, so I've got the 3 bows just here, just pinned on, but just to say, you can also purchase ready-made bows as well, which would also look nice. But also there's little motifs like this that you can purchase as well, which can look really nice on the edges of the little dolls' bloomers and what have you. Or you can get roses. These ribbon roses are very pretty, and you can get those in different sizes as well. There's a bigger one and a smaller one there. So if we'd have wanted to, I think if I'd have got big bows like that, I probably would have used some of those, but I've only got a couple of blue ones. But that would have looked really sweet on the end there as well, just on the flowers. And again, you can double these up. So if you wanted to have the ribbon, but you wanted to have the little flower on top, don't forget it's your character. You can embellish that. And actually that looks really quite sweet, doesn't it? With the green little flower on top as well. So I might well end up doing that with mine just on the legs. And I'll leave the bow just on the waist, just as one of the brown bows, I think. Yeah, actually I'm going to do that. I'm going to double those up. So let's get our second bow. So I've got 2 bows there, put those ribbons away. I just want to give you some different examples, or you can put a button there as well if you wanted to. That's another good suggestion, is to put a button. So then once you've got that all together, I'm going to sew the bows on first with the brown thread. And that's about my darkest brown thread that I've got. That'll do nicely. You might want a thimble as well, because sometimes sewing these embellishments on can be a little bit hard on your fingers as well. So just be aware that if you've got a thimble, then have that to hand, especially if your hands get hot and sticky as well. Start at the waist one, because that's going to be just one bow, isn't it? So I've got my pin holding it on. I've got my ribbon sitting as I want it to, with the darker colour out. And I'm just going to take a stitch behind the ribbon onto the seam allowance, really from the outside, so that I can bury my knot behind my bow. Also, if you've seen any of these little silicone ended thimbles, they are really very good because they stretch to fit your finger, but it holds on as well, so you've got the metal bucket at the end to push your needle through with, but you can use the silicone on the edge to help pull the needle through, and I have found that to be very good. So I'm just going to do a few stitches behind my, tuck the knot down, behind my bow, just holding on to the edge of it, just to secure it on. Just make sure that if you go around your pin, you notice, and just hold it in place with your finger and your thumb. And you're trying to do a decent chunk of your bow, but without really your stitches being seen too much. Let's just come along this edge just here first. Okay, so that's now on, so let's take the pin out so I don't stab myself with the pin. And then what I want to do now is concentrate on coming down this section of the bow here. Let's just pull out the edge of that ribbon because there's a little dotted detail, isn't on the edge. If I put my fingers up one of the trouser legs, I can have fingers on the inside and on the outside. And now I'm going to do some stitches just holding this ribbon down, and I'm going to need my thimble just to push my stitch through. And I'm doing a little back stitch, and I'm going through all of the layers through to the inside, which is why I need my thimble to push it through. And I can feel I'm going through a little bit of the elastic as well, but that doesn't matter. If you need to, just do little stab stitches where you go in and out. But I'm just running alongside that edge of the bow just there, in order that I'm just catching through all the layers so that the bow won't come undone. It's important to make sure you've got it sitting how you want to once you start doing this. And then once we've done that, I'm kind of sewing all the way around that square centre part, if that makes sense. And then back up to the inside, through the inside here. Let's catch some of that ribbon at the bottom edge. So just on that bottom edge there, just to hold that in place. A few stitches just there. And back inside, and I'm going to come up down the other side of that bow again. This is why having a matching thread really works really well when you're doing this. And I'm trying to go through all of the layers again. Thread does not like to get knotted when you're doing this kind of work. Then back to a stab stitch because it's just too thick at the moment. Just make sure your bow is sitting where you want it to. Then I'm back to where I started, so now I'm going to go to the inside. I've only got a few stitches on the inside. I'm just going to do a few stitches in place just to anchor that thread down. And then just put my thread through the centre and leave a long tail before I snip that off. And there's our bow sewn on there, looking all nice and neat. So I'm going to go now and sew these bows onto the legs using the exact same way. And then when I've finished that, I'm going to sew my little rose ribbon on the same way. I'm going to change my thread colour to a cream once I've sewn my bow on, and then I'll do some stitches through the cream of the rose. I'll show you how. I'll come back to you when I do that, because they sometimes look a little tricky as to how to sew them on, because they've got quite a pointed back to them, haven't they? They're quite deep, I suppose, and if you're not sure how to sew these down to catch it down, then it can be a bit of a mystery. So let me just come back to you in a minute and I'll show you how to sew those on. Okay, so we've got our waist bow on and we've got our 2 ankle bows on now. So now just to double up these embellishments, I'm going to take one of my little ribbons, and you can see that the bows are made up of these little twists of ribbon, and it's got like a stitch through just to hold it. So what we want to do is almost flatten it down slightly in our hands. Decide which way you want up and which way you want down. Let's go through. I put a double threaded needle with a thread that's double and a knot at the end. And I'm going to come through from the other side into the middle of the flat section of my bow with my needle and thread. Hopefully without any knots on my thread, because there weren't any when I started. Always on camera. Right, okay, that's got that in place. So then let's just first take a stitch one side from the back of the ribbon, and we're just going to try and come up so that we're between where the ribbon petals are, just slightly. Can you see how that is coming up between? Caught on there. And then, because we don't want to flatten these petals, we're going to hold it against our bow, and then just a few millimetres to one side of where we came up, still between the petals, the ridge in between the petals, we're going to go back down again. So you're really going to put these on slowly with a stab stitch. That's the best way I've found of putting them on. And then your stitch will disappear in the gap between the petals. So let's come back up again, find another place to come back up, perhaps in the middle this time. So we're going to go through the centre of the ribbon, and we just need to find where, oh, that's not going in the right place. So you're quite thick because you're going through, now you're going through the centre of the bow and through the ribbon rows as well, which is why it takes quite a little bit of manipulation just to get your needle into the right place. Not quite right. That's better. That's better. There, that'll do. So through the centre now. Make sure you've not caught any of your ribbon on the back, and then we're going to take a stitch through again, a few millimetres to one side. And each time you're just catching a little bit of the ribbon petals, just to pull it in and just to hold it and secure it down. So now let's go to one of the outer petals. Let's put a little stitch to come through one of the outer edges, and then let's put a stitch to hold that petal down. And by petal I just mean one of the little folds in the ribbons. Let's come down to the bottom here, catch it through the centre there, and with each of these little stitches we're just holding everything in place. This is the best way I've found of, and I've not had any ribbons, any ribbon bows come on, ribbon roses come off on me when I've sewn them on in this way. Just catching onto my eyes of my lace. Let's come over the other side now, and let's do one over the other side. This again is where your thimble helps, just be able to push that thread through. And if you go around a few times, you'll just eventually have caught your ribbon, and it sort of flattens it down a bit as well as you're sewing. And if you've got this coordinating thread, it just hides those stitches, but just make sure that it holds it down nice and secure for you. So that's how that's looking now. Quite sweet, isn't it, really? Sometimes I do go in and put a little thread through the leaves, so I thread my needle through the leaf like that, because it's just a loop of, and then put a stitch to hold that down. But on these, they're behaving quite well at the moment, so I'm not going to do that. Now, when you've finished, just go to the other side, take a few stitches in place, just on top of each other, just little stitches on top of each other, just to sort of secure all of that down. I don't think they're going to go anywhere, but it's just the best way of doing it. And then when you're ready, you can just snip that thread off. Whilst you're here, just check your ribbon to make sure that that's lying nice. And then what I would also suggest you do, just again, finishing touch, which can just make all the difference. Needle in your thread again, but decide where your front is, and then fold your seam allowance with your ribbon towards the back of the edge. There's my front, so this seam allowance wants to go towards the back, and then I'm just going to put a few stitches through the edge of the ribbon to hold it flat. And again, it just stops that seam allowance from just poking out and making a mess. Or looking messy, should I say, really. Looks a bit cumbersome when I'm doing it like this, but it's, as I say, it's just that lace is quite stiff on mine. Yours might be softer, but it'll just hold it on top of each other and just make it look neat. I'll show you the comparison between the two sides once I've finished. Let me just do a couple more stitches. That was my finger, in case you didn't tell. Just make sure if you do catch yourself, you don't go and bleed all over your lovely new garment. Just catch that down on the inside and snip that off. So if I show you now, that one all folded back, nice and neat, against this one, how that one sticks up and sticks into the centre and doesn't look quite so neat. So that's the two compared. So with this one, I'll work out which is back, lay it flat again, and I'll just put a couple of stitches just to lay that flat against that lace, and it'll give you an almost invisible join. Okay, let me just get my other bow on, and then I'll come back when it's time to try on sapphire. The other thing I've got is I've got a little bit of this Prim Fray Check liquid. And also, so what you can do with this is, if you're very careful, because don't let it get onto your fabric, because it will actually stain your fabric. But if you sort of hold the edge of your bow proud, you can just run a little dobble of this Fray Check along the edges of your bows, and it'll just harden off those edges. Just don't want to let that one go very much. It'll harden off the edges of those bows so that the fibres won't fray. So again, that's a handy little thing. I also use this on buttonholes when I'm doing buttonholes for myself or for my characters' garments as well. Just again, make sure you don't get any on your fabric, because it will stain. Yeah, be very careful, because I have tipped this up before when the little nozzle got stuck in the lid rather than was on my was it rather than being proud and left on the bottle still, and then it did go and catch on my clothing, and well, my clothing as well as the item I was making, and it spoilt it. So there we go, we've got those two bows with the rosebuds on them, and then the centre one. So let's now just get our character. Come on, Sapphire, it's time to try on. And also don't forget, we can steam those leg elastics as well if we wanted to, if they're a bit too loose, because that will tighten up the elastic and tighten up the fibres in there. So let's pop those onto her. Lovely and full, and they're going to look lovely when she's standing in her lovely dress as well. Let's get that all sort of all nice and level. So a lovely length on her, going to cover just over her feet slightly, which I'm quite happy with that, because also if she chooses to sit down, then don't forget that the legs will rise up slightly. So it's nice to have them a little bit longer so that they sit nicely when she's sitting. I'll get her to sit for you. There we go, and then they're standing up. There's the back as well. If you've got a character with a tail, you could always leave a little gap in the back if you wanted to on this seam in order for the tail to poke out, but for her we've not got that, so that's all fine. So yeah, let me just turn the camera around and we'll have a roundup. Okay, so here's Bella, all in her lovely bloomers there. Got a lovely body to them, haven't they? Looking really, really sweet. Based on this, maybe the fabric will be right for her dress as well, give her nice sheen. Got the bows and the ribbons and the lace all looking all lovely, and now she's just ready for her dress, her jacket and her hat. So we'll get on with doing the dress next, but if you are making the bloomers for any other character, then as I said at the beginning of the video, then these bloomers are used for each of the female characters, they've just got slightly different fabrics or finishings. For example, if you're making the bloomers for Elisha's wardrobe, you'll see they've just got these patches on. So before you actually put your trouser legs together, you've neatened off the bottom and you've put your lace on the bottom, and before you put your elastic on, I would suggest as well, I would at that point then sew your patches on, and I'll put a note on the video for those that are going to be making Elisha's bloomers that they'll need to just attach those patches, and I would just put them on the fabric, and then I would just do a little row of stitches just all around the four corners in order just to hold those in place, and that should do for you. Okay, hope you've enjoyed stitching along with me today, and I've certainly enjoyed having you here with me, so thank you very much for joining me. And the next will be the apron dress, that is the universal dress for all the female characters in the book, so we'll get on with making the apron dress next. If you've enjoyed the video and you enjoy my way of, I'm going to say, teaching or sewing along with me, then please do consider hitting the subscribe button. It'll be lovely to have you along, and also you can share this video with your friends as well if you wanted to make sure that they know how they can make the bloomers. Okay, everybody, take care, have a great day, and I'll speak to you soon. Take care, bye.